just going through the furring requirements, because I think there's a little bit of confusion about that. It's not going forward with the remodel program. To assume that most of these walls that needed to be furred out have already been furred out, and if those stores should have already been built with demising wall mesh. So we are not going to be showing furring in those remodel stores coming up for the LDC program. That's pretty standard. Furring is for the rebuilds and new stores is typically done along demising walls, unless you have perhaps like a hallway that has no power and data, then you could just get away. Your furring could be just the mesh and the sheetrock. But this is to provide us that clean pathway for our power data plumbing, right? So you've put it on the exterior walls in the sales floor to create that pathway as well. When you have window areas, you want to typically frame in front of those windows unless code will not allow it. As needed in front of windows in the sales area. So in some cases, we don't have enough wall space for all the fixtures, so we as allowed, we will go ahead and fur in front of some of those sales floor windows, typically on a side elevation is where you would do that. Plumbing walls, pretty obvious if we need to create a pathway for our drain lines, etc. We put it over CMU when we have power and data required. So, backroom areas, you got a CMU wall. We need to create that. We need to create a pathway for power and data on most walls. Not required on exterior back of house walls. So unless there's a power data plumbing required. So we don't need to put mesh typically on an exterior wall. And if we don't have a lot of plumbing or there's no plumbing there or there's not a lot of power data requirements, we don't need to fur in front of those walls. One note, if possible, when the architects are laying out the back of house, if there's an opportunity to put the desks and the training carts on the interior partition walls to avoid us having to add that extra framing on an exterior wall, then that helps us be a little more efficient with our framing layouts. On an inventory room, we have a call out where we just put mesh, cement board, and sheetrock, which is our number 6 call out. And typically we have power and data required for our charging station for the REMOs, which are our iPads that they ring the transactions up. Those could be put typically on an interior wall to avoid having to fur out that either exterior or that demising wall, which we can just put the security on there and not have to add that added framing. Okay, so some mesh clarifications. Always walls, ceilings of all inventory rooms get mesh and cement board. Shared demising walls get the mesh up to 12 feet. So that's been a clarification that we just want to make sure we call out. We do not need to go to the deck. That was clarified a little while ago. It's to 12 feet. If you have a store where you're framing in front of windows and it's an MD20 or an LDC store, you need to add the mesh on those walls. So that's a new clarification, but they do want, loss prevention wants the mesh so that if somebody was able to get through the window, they would have a heck of a time getting through with the mesh there, okay? That is not a requirement for the rural market stores. The expectation is that they're going to have the security film that's going to provide that initial barrier, and we don't need the added security of the mesh there. The other call out is if you if the store has defense light or riot glass on the exterior of the windows already, then that added security is not required because that's a robust system. It's very almost very difficult to get through that. And if they get through the defense light, the other stuff's not going to stop them. Not required on exterior walls or if you have a CMU wall. So if in some cases there may be a CMU wall that's a demising wall. I've seen in some cases even some interior partitions have some CMU. You don't need to put mesh on CMU. If they get through the CMU, the mesh isn't going to stop anybody. So if you based on surveys, et cetera, you identify it as a CMU wall, you do not need to add additional mesh or cement board, et cetera.
Right, 12 feet for the mesh. So if you have a 20-foot window and you need to block out that window, you're still doing the wall to block out the window, but the mesh only needs to go to 12 feet.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Okay, so cement board. The only place that requires cement board is the inventory room, okay? We don't require it on demising walls. We don't require it on exterior walls unless there's an inventory room, right? So the only place you should ever see a number 2 or a number 6 wall call out is on an inventory room, okay? And I have seen quite a few sets of plans that are showing cement board on demising walls, out on the sales floor, et cetera, and that is a mistake. So I just want to make that very clear. The cement board is on the inside of the walls and the ceiling of the inventory room only. And it goes on top of the mesh, and then you put a layer of rock over the top of that. So that's cement board clarification. All right. So now we're going to talk about the film. The expectation from loss prevention now is when you fur over a window, regardless of the design, and you're framing in front of a section of glass, that you do need to put security film on that glass. And the standard is you need to put an opaque or blackout film on first, and then you put the security film on top of that. They only make clear security film. So it will require 2 layers of film, and NGS, who is our supplier, is able to go ahead and put both layers on for us. The security film gets a layer of structural silicone around the perimeter that basically creates on the inside of the glass a car windshield effect. So if you smash it from the outside, the film holds it in place and that caulk locks it to the mullions around the perimeter. Doesn't prevent you from breaking the glass like the defense light does, but it does make it very difficult to get through the glass because it provides that windshield type of effect. Okay, there's been some confusion about whether or not security film goes on the outside or the inside. Like I said, the film is on the inside. Defense light and riot glass are an exterior application. And the reason you wouldn't put film on the outside is somebody could take an X-Acto knife and cut through the film on the outside, and basically that would make it so that they could get through it without too much trouble. So it's got to be on the inside, so when they smash it, it holds the window in place. It holds it in place, and it makes it difficult for them to get in. It's important that obviously on the construction schedules, now that we're having to add this, that this is scheduled to be installed shortly after construction starts. Because the framing obviously has to go in. One of the first things that gets installed. Usually there's some demo first for a day or two, but then the framing is coming in right behind it. So coordinating with NGS, who is our security film supplier, to be on site within the first couple days of construction to install the opaque film and the security film is really critical. All right, so any other questions? You got your W301 and your 302. The 301 is your security film, 302 is the opaque film. And the reason we, just so everybody understands why we do the opaque film, right, is in some cases, we are not allowed to put branded wraps or graphics on the outside of the glass. We also, sometimes the branded graphics, there might be a situation where they decide, T-Mobile decides they want to go in a different direction and they want to remove the existing wraps while they wait for new ones to come in. If you don't have the wraps on and there's nothing to block out your view of the backside of the framing, it's a pretty ugly looking situation, right? So you would have exposed framing through the glass, which would look terrible. And so that's why you got to have that blackout or opaque film on the inside of the window in order to prevent you from seeing in there.
So that is the sequence, right? The security film on the inside, they build the wall, and then you put the wrap on the outside?
Correct. Clarifications about QMI. So QMI, these are our roll-down manual grills. These are used on the sales floor, right? If you are furring out in front of a wall, you can't put grills. I've actually seen that called out before, where we furred out in front of a wall, and somebody thought we were supposed to put grills there. So if you're furred out in front of a wall, that you can't. The grills have to attach to mullions and be able to pull down. The preference is to not have them in the back of house. In some cases, we have a showroom window area where city may not allow us to frame tight to the window. They want some transparency to the glass, in which case you would have the grills there potentially. You would never, if you have riot glass or defense light, you would not need grills. Rural market stores don't get grills. So these are your standard MD20 or LDC stores that, sales floor is typically where these are located. Very rare you'd have something in the back of house area, like I said, unless there was a showroom display window. Typically, you cannot put those on emergency exit doors. So in those cases, that's where you would look to potentially add just riot glass or defense light, maybe on if you had a glass exit door. In some cases, we don't our standard is a steel exit door. We put a Trident lock on it, but for stores that maybe there's a glass storefront on the back of the building and our exit door is a glass door, the preference is to put defense light or riot glass on that exit door so it makes it difficult to get through that door. And you can't, like I said, the grill typically is not allowed by most city codes an emergency exit door like that. Okay, so I want to just talk about how the partition designation, right? So every wall partition has this 4-digit code, okay? The first number one is your partition type. So this is how the wall attaches to the deck or et cetera. It's a type A, for instance, goes all the way to the roof deck. The number two is your construction of their partition. So this tells you whether there's mesh or cement board or just sheetrock, et cetera. The number three is the size of the studs, and the number four is the insulation if it's required. Okay, so this is all your walls are going to have this call out. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so your partition types. Your type A partition is the one that goes all the way to the deck. Okay, so your demising walls will typically have a type A wall. There are some exceptions. I know we have some malls out there that have smoke evac systems, and there has to be open spaces in between the tenant spaces, but those are extremely rare. So for the most part, these are demising walls, typically for most of our programs are already existing. We will have some partition type A walls in the LDC design coming up when we have a situation where we're going open to deck. So that's not going to be standard for the rebuilds or the remodels, but on some of the new stores where we are going to be open to the deck on the sales floor, we have to have those walls go all the way to the deck. The type B, these are most of your walls. So this is your furring, this is your interior partitions, etc. These are walls that go up just above the height of the drop ceiling. Or potentially you might have a drop hard lid ceiling in a mall location or something. But typical, 10-6 sales floor ceiling height, right? So your framing is going to go up to about 11 feet. You're going to get just above that so that you can attach your grid to something. Type C wall, this is just a shorter wall with, it's not, required to be attached to structure or anything. You might find these little pony walls under storefront glass. They're pretty rare. A type C wall framing call out is going to be very rare. And then the type D is the inventory room call out, which shows the wall and the hard lid details here where the wall comes up and ends at the hard lid ceiling essentially. Pretty straightforward on the partition types. Okay, construction, this is where I want to spend a good chunk of the time. The construction of the partition, okay? So this is your second digit in your code, right? So you go back up to your, if you were to look at, so you're looking at your 4-digit codes. This is the second digit here, right? The call out number 1. This is an interior wall that has rock on both sides, but doesn't have any mesh or cement board or anything else. So this would be, walls separating the front of house from back of house, etc. The number 2 call out, this is your inventory room call out that is, you're building a new wall, and you'll look here, you've got your new framing here, you then have your layer of mesh, and you have a cement board, and then your gyp on that. So there's 3 layers. You want to keep it to 3 layers. If there's existing rock on there on the inventory room, you're going to want to strip it off and just get it to the mesh, cement board, and rock. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to get your door frames to work, etc. The wall is going to be too thick. So the number 2 call out, that is your inventory room wall call out when new framing is required. I'm going to jump to the number 6 because this is if you have an existing wall, this is your, and you have an inventory room. So maybe it's a demising wall that's existing. Maybe maybe we're hardening an existing room or a wall that is already existing. Then this is your existing wall here. You add your mesh, cement board, and gyp. So the wall call out 6 is when you have existing walls for your inventory room. Wall call out 3, this is where we're furring maybe in front of an exterior wall where we don't have to add the mesh, right? So I have an exterior wall. It's not a demising wall. It's not a shared tenant wall. This is just an exterior wall that we needed to fur out to create a void insulation and things like that, so we could have a clear pathway for our plumbing and or data, power, etc. Partition type 4. So this is your typical demising wall furring when out on the sales floor or maybe back of house where you're trying to create that pathway. So you've got your existing wall. You're going to apply, the preference is to install the mesh on that existing wall. then do the framing, and then do the rock. Quicker for the guys to install the mesh, easier for the electricians in the future, etc. I will say that in the situations where we're having to fur in front of glass, then that's not going to be possible. You're going to have to do the framing and then the mesh and the rock. But hopefully, in most cases, if you're up against, you're doing this in front of an existing demising wall where the rock is already there, you're doing the mesh first, then the framing, and then the gyp. Wall call out 5. This is an existing demising wall, okay? You'll notice there's multiple layers of gyp on here. Those are based on fire ratings, etc. And then there's a layer of mesh and gyp. So this would be a situation where you have, say, a hallway, and I've got an example for everybody here. So you have a hallway that has no power or data in it, but it's on a demising wall, shared tenant demising wall. You would just do, A5EE is a good call out, right? You've got your wall, your full height framing, but it's existing. There's no new studs required. There's no insulation, but you just need to put mesh and sheetrock on that wall, right? Harden the wall to make it so that somebody can't tunnel through from the other side. So you'll notice, depending on fire ratings, 1 hour, 2 hour wall ratings, there would be added layers of gyp, but those are typically existing unless it's a brand new construction and maybe we're having to add additional layers. But that would be called out in those particular cases as to how many layers of gyp would be required on that wall. But the important thing to note is this call out is mesh and sheetrock in the majority of the cases. That's what this is for. Okay, so let's just wanted to get into the last couple, the last 2 digits. So you have your stud sizing and your insulation types. Okay, so E is existing framing. One of the things that has changed from recent prototypes, the standard going forward is that your general furring is going to be this number 3 call out, which is your 3 5/8 studs. Okay, the 3 5/8 are the more standard framing materials. They're much more readily available. Sometimes you can't find the 1 5/8, and so it also provides a little bit more room for the J boxes and the electricians to work, etc. So the prototype is going to be updated from the 1 to the 3 here to show that as being kind of the standard stud size for all that sales floor furring as required. So the 1 would get used if you have 1 5/8. Maybe there's a space constraint. We're so tight trying to get a space for a door for egress purposes or whatever. We're trying not to move an existing wall and we need that couple inches, then we'll leave it as a 1. The 1 is certainly, we can work with it. It's just, like I said, it's not as standard, and it's, we just get a little more space with the 3 5/8. 6-inch studs, that's pretty standard on most demising walls. So it would be called out as such. And in some cases, we need them for plumbing. So this is another clarification where I think the default has been whenever we have a wet wall is to show 6-inch studs there. We should be able to keep all of our plumbing in this 3 5/8 stud wall. So as the architects are calling out, I would say in 99% of the cases where we have a with the wall call out 3 instead of the 6. Z-channel, I think most of you guys know what that is. In certain cases, we may have a CMU wall that we need to add some sheetrock to, or there's a pole or something, structural column, and we want to do as minimal furring around it as possible, we could use some Z-channel there. Sometimes I've seen it under windows, might be like a little concrete wall under a window that doesn't go all the way to the floor. We could use some Z-channel there. So that is rarely used, but it's an option. In general, your number, the 3 is going to be used almost everywhere where we're doing any framing. Occasionally a 1, rarely a 6, unless we're having to actually build a demising wall as part of a new construction, cold, dark shell, etc. So this should help streamline some things. We should see a lot less 1s and 6s going forward. For the most part, we should start seeing 3s on just about everything when we need framing.